Hello, 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 everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Great Money Monday. My name is Rosalind Brown of Your Wealth Guidance, where we help Black women create their financial independence map and identify the tools for success so you can live life on your own terms. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on
Identify the tools
notifications
for success
so
so
you
you
do
can live
not
life
miss
on your own
any
terms.
future
Be sure to hit the
Money
subscribe button.
Mondays. And so, got a little got a little background noise there. And so, want to welcome a great guest with us. And so, I always love when you all throw out ideas and you're like, wait, I want to know about this. I'm interested in that, or I've heard some bad information over here. And so, I'm always super happy to bring in somebody to talk about something that you are passionate about. And I think it was 3 or 4 people that reached out and they said, do you know anybody in franchising? Do you know anybody who lets me know how to get started? If buying a franchise makes sense. And so I found someone. So we have Nancy Lanard, and she is passionate about her clients and their success. And for over 25 years, Nancy has prided herself in listening to her clients, thinking outside of the box to respond to their needs, and speaking to them in plain English and not legalese. With her years of experience as an in house attorney and as a business owner herself, Nancy can better advise her business clients and brings to the relationship an in depth understanding and compassion for their business and situation needs. Nancy is the author of many articles. She's been quoted in a number of national publications and been interviewed for many video and audio podcasts and radio programs on the topic of business and franchise law. Her years of experience representing clients buy franchises or businesses that they want to expand franchising nationwide, and she's earned an award of Legal Eagle for over 14 consecutive years. She's not only represented startups and small to mid-sized companies, she also represents commercial tenants, franchises nationwide for many chains, including My Salon Suite, Hand and Stone Massage, and Facial Spa, Pet Supplies Plus, Island Fin Poke, and Scent Hound, among others. So, those are some of the ones you're interested in. She has a lot of information there. And so, without further ado, I want to turn things over to Nancy, and be sure to drop any questions that you might have in the chat as well as we're going through so we can make sure that we address those as we go through. Nancy, take it over.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. That was great. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. We're going to talk about Franchise Law 101 and what you really should know before investing in a franchise. Among the brands that you named, we represent franchisees, and they recommend us to their franchisees for their commercial leases. Those are all brick and mortar, but there are a lot of franchises out there. We handle, oh gosh, so many different brands, and a lot of them are home-based, which is actually a less expensive alternative and a less risky investment in a lot of ways as well. But I think that initially what I'd like to do is go through what is a franchise and what are the documents you're going to get, and how do you validate that franchise opportunity? How do you make this decision? So my first slide is, why do you hire a franchise attorney to even evaluate the documents? So once you have been given documents from a franchise company that you're interested in, why don't you just use your brother or your sister or a friend who is a business lawyer or general attorney that maybe does wills and estates or family law? Isn't this all written in stone? Isn't it all boilerplate? Why is it that I need to hire someone that's a specialist in this area? And the reason that I wanted to cover this is because so many people think that. They just think, oh, my next door neighbor is a business lawyer. Why can't I just have him or her look at the documents for me? And why do I have to, have somebody else do that? Well, the reason is, this is a very niche area of law. This is a very specialized area of law. It actually comes out of the securities laws. And there's a disclosure document that's similar to a securities prospectus. So if you've ever gotten a securities prospectus when you bought stock or invested in stock, the documents that you would get when you're looking into a franchise are similar. They are disclosure documents, and they're there to inform you. And we're going to talk in depth about that. any franchise lawyer out there is going to certainly have the knowledge and hopefully the experience to be able to help you. What distinguishes my firm, we're an all-female law firm, by the way, and we are 6 attorneys. And what distinguishes us from most other franchise law firms is that we only represent franchisees, individuals looking to invest in a franchise opportunity. And we only help them with evaluating that opportunity, setting up their business entity, and the lease if there is a brick and mortar component to it, and resales of franchises. We don't go into court. And we don't handle franchisor side, which is the company that actually has the trademark and is licensing that opportunity. The investment is a costly one, even if it's not expensive to start with. You are going to be spending a great deal of money and time in this business. And so it's very important that you make the right decision. And as far as my firm is concerned, we try to be very responsive. Our timing to turn around a franchise evaluation is less than a week. And that's start to finish. That includes review of the documents and review with the client. We handle everything on a flat fee basis. And as I said, this is what we do day in and day out. So I just wanted to go over that real quickly, and we can talk more about that at the end if you have any questions on that. So let me describe what an FDD is. An FDD is a franchise disclosure document. It consists of 23 items of disclosure that the federal law requires be provided to anybody who's interested in investing in that franchise opportunity. This is federal law, so that's why we as a firm handle franchise reviews nationwide. We're based out of suburban Philadelphia. But I have an attorney that resides in Parkland, Florida. And, I had another attorney just recently with me who was out of Texas. We practice nationwide. We're licensed in multiple states. But again, it's primarily federal law that applies. These 23 items of disclosure are very, very important to go through. I spoke to someone on a 5 o'clock call today who was looking at a quick service restaurant concept. And I said to him, have you gotten a chance to go through the 23 items of disclosure? He said, what's that? And I said, do you have the FDD from the franchisor? He said, yes, I got an email a while back on it. He said, but I never opened it. So I said, well, let's talk about that because it's a very important document to go through. So let's talk about what's in there. So there are 23 items. The first 20 are the ones that I would say you really do need to read. The 21, 22, and 23, not so much. So the first 2 items are about the background about the company and about the people involved. So item 1 talks about the company, its parents, predecessors. This is the franchisor company, the parents, predecessors, affiliated businesses, competition in the industry, regulations in the industry. So if you're going to look at a child care franchise, let's say, there's a lot of regulations that you need to be aware of. There's a lot of competition that you should be aware of. So if you're looking at a kiddie academy or a Lightbridge academy or any other early child learning kind of situation, you need to know what those are, and that's going to tell you information about that. Item 2, and I'm just using that as an example, and item 2 talks about the individuals who are the primary individuals you're going to be interacting with as far as the franchise is concerned. Who is the head of the franchise, who's maybe the salesperson for it, but who are also the people who are going to do the training and the other things. Who are these people? What's their background? They have to give in a little blurb 10-year history about their background of who they are and who they've been with. How long have they been with this franchise company? Are they experienced? Are they fly-by-night people? That's there in item 2. Items 3 and 4, I take a close look at. And that's the litigation and bankruptcy disclosures. Item 3 is the litigation disclosure. Item 4 is the bankruptcy. And this is across the board. Whether you're looking at a McDonald's, you're looking at a Lightbridge Academy, you're looking at a Hand and Stone, whatever brand you're looking at, they must provide this FDD, this franchise disclosure document to you. And they have to give it to you. I don't know if I cover this in here, but they must give you 14 calendar days to have this document. It's called a cooling off period. It's to evaluate this document and to go through it and to see what the contents are and to see if this is an opportunity that you want. So that's what 3 and 4 are. Those are the litigation and bankruptcy disclosures. They are going to have short summaries of any litigation that's relevant. It's not every lawsuit or every bankruptcy. It's litigation and bankruptcy that's franchise related in some form. So if one of those people that are listed in item 2 or the franchisor company itself ever had a bankruptcy in the last 10 years, it must be in item 4. It must be disclosed. If there is a lawsuit that relates to fraud, misrepresentations, or part of the franchisee-franchisor relationship, that must be disclosed in item 3. Would item 3 require that that a franchisor disclose if they were sued because they didn't pay a bill? No, that's not relevant to a franchisee making this decision. So that not every litigation and not every bankruptcy must be disclosed. So sometimes you'll see an FDD that will say no disclosure required. And that just means that doesn't mean that they didn't have any litigation. It doesn't mean they didn't have any bankruptcy. It just means none that are relevant to be put in here under the terms of what that means under the guidelines for an FDD. Items 5, and I'm only going to cover this through item 7, but items 5, 6, and 7 to me are the most important for a prospective franchisee to read. I want you to read all 20 if you're looking at a franchise, but 5, 6, and 7 are the most critical. And why are they the most critical? Because those are the financial disclosures. Item 5 is the disclosure of the fees you'll pay up front to the franchisor, the initial fees. They may be more than just the franchise fee, the initial franchise fee. There may be other fees you have to pay up front. Whatever they are, they must be disclosed in item 5. Item 6 are the ongoing fees. So everybody thinks royalties. You all know that as an ongoing fee in a franchise. There's more than that. Often there's software license fees. There may be marketing fund fees. There are other fees. All of those must be disclosed in item 6. It's going to be a chart that's going to have line items disclosing what those fees are. And item 7 is the cost to open and operate the business. And that is definitely a chart. And it'll have a range, a low and a high. And I always recommend my clients budget on the high end of the range that's listed there, okay? With items 5, 6, and 7, there are always notes or footnotes. They're not always in the foot, so they're just notes that follow the text or body of those items. Very important to go through those notes because there's a lot of information in those notes that's not necessarily covered in the charts or in the body of each of those items. And it's very critical to making an informed decision. So I have an actual podcast that I gave that was over 2 hours. It's in 6 parts that actually goes through every section of the FDD, every item and every exhibit. For purposes of tonight's call, though, or today's call, depending on where you are in the country, I think that that's sufficient for us to talk about right this moment. At least, that's a good start. And as I said, I think 5, 6, and 7 are the most important anyway. I think it's important to read items 1 and 2 so that you know all of the information about the company and the people. 3 and 4 leave to us. 5, 6, and 7, though, I think are really important to be aware of. The FDD is required to be written in plain English. And that's in quotes. What does that mean? A lawyer wrote it. Plain English isn't really plain English because a lawyer wrote it. So I've written them. Other lawyers write them. We try to make them in plain English. I don't represent franchisors any longer, only franchisees. But when I did represent franchisors, and I was in-house counsel to Nutrisystem 25 years ago when they had 1,800 locations around the U.S. and were the #1 weight loss company in the U.S., I can tell you, plain English isn't what you might think of as plain English, hence the quotes. So it is required to be written in plain English. It's not supposed to be legalese, but it is a boring document. It isn't the most exciting thing. It's not like reading a novel, but it is an important document to go through. So then one of the exhibits to that FDD will be any contracts that a franchisee or prospective franchisee will be required to sign. And of course, the most important one will be the franchise agreement itself. That's the actual contract that you're going to enter into with the franchisor. And that's, of course, what we will go through if you retain us. So that's an important contract that can be written in legalese. That's an actual contract. It's not the part of the FDD. There's 23 items that have to be written in plain English. If someone is buying a multi-units of a particular brand, let's say you're buying a quick service restaurant, a Hand and Stone, a Lightbridge Academy, they're brick and mortar franchises. And you might want to buy 3 of them. You might want to commit to 3. What happens in that instance is that you sign up for 3, let's say, or 6 units or whatever, and you make that commitment right up front. You pay usually a discounted fee. That's how they kind of suck you in to do that. And so you're paying a discounted fee. Maybe they offer to give you 3 units for the price of 2. And so it sounds very appealing. And they're going to have you sign an additional document. And I mentioned that in the next bullet point down, called an area development agreement. That area development agreement says, okay, I'm going to develop this certain area, this territory that you've given me for these 3 units in a certain time frame. I can assure you that almost every franchisor out there wants you to develop it way faster than is really reasonably possible. I've seen franchise documents that want you to develop 3 units 6 months apart. Well, you can't find a location, build out that, negotiate the business terms, negotiate the legal terms of the lease, build it out, get those permits, get a contractor in, do the build out, and go get it to grand opening with a certificate of occupancy in 6 months. It's just next to impossible. So that's unrealistic. So one of the things in an area development agreement that's very typical to negotiate is the actual development schedule. So they want you to develop, let's say 3. We like to see it at least 3 in 3 years. So at least you have 12 months between them. I'd prefer it even longer. 18 months would be lovely. We try to push that envelope out when we're negotiating them. There's often a non-compete agreement, meaning that you're not going to compete. It's also in the franchise agreement as well, that within X amount of time after the franchise agreement's expired, or for whatever reason you've been terminated or you've sold the business, that you're not going to compete with the franchisor, that you're not going to start up another business because they've trained you, they've given you skills, they've given you business knowledge that is proprietary to them, and they don't want you to take that and then go out and start competing with them and anywhere near usually where any other location is. And often, almost always in a franchise setting, a franchise agreement is going to require a personal guarantee. And a personal guarantee is where you personally are guaranteeing the financial obligations under that agreement. So meaning that your personal assets, your bank accounts, your home possibly, and your stocks and bonds and other investments that you're working so hard on this venue to establish and grow, could be at risk. And I can tell you there isn't a lease out there that I see these days that also doesn't have a personal guarantee. In the franchise realm, it's usually not negotiable. And often spousal guarantees are required, meaning if you're married, that the spouse must guarantee as well. And the reason behind that is because the franchisors know that almost all spouses hold assets jointly. And if they only have the guarantee of one party, that means it's meaningless. So they ask for a spousal guarantee. I will tell you that's often a tough sell, and people walk away from franchises because their spouse won't sign nonetheless. And there are ways to work around that. I've come up with some ways that I think are palatable to a franchisor to walk away from that spousal guarantee, but nonetheless, it's usually in there. The other thing that's very important, there's 3 things I tell a prospective franchise client to do, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide. But one of them is to look at the audited financial statements of the franchisor. They are going to be in the exhibits. Now, why do I tell people to look at the franchisor's financials? Why is that important? Isn't it more important to be worried about the franchisees and how their revenues are and what they're doing? And yes, that is very important. But the financials of the franchisor are also very important because it tells you if the franchisor is financially healthy. And if the franchisor is not financially healthy, you should walk away, because what happens if they go into bankruptcy? And I'm going to tell you my story about that because I was in-house counsel to Nutrisystem and they went into bankruptcy. So let's talk about how you validate a franchise system. These are the three things that I tell every prospective client that I talk to who is coming to me for a franchise evaluation. The first and most important is to speak to franchisees that are in the system or those that actually have left the system. And there is an exhibit in every FDD that is required, that is a list of current and former franchisees with their contact information. Call them and call through that exhibit. Franchisors always want to set you up with validation calls where they set it up. And of course, they're going to give you their top people, those that are going to be happy campers, that are going to give you very, positive comments about the franchise system, because that's human nature. Why wouldn't they? They don't want to have you talk to someone that may say negative things about their brand. I'm saying call from the list in the FDD itself, because then you're not getting a skewed list. You know that you're calling randomly. And I have a blog post on my website that is the top 10 questions to ask, my favorite top 10 questions to ask existing franchisees. Start with that list. It's right there on my website, and which I will share on the final screen. But that's a great resource to use. And if you're using it to make phone calls to franchisees, feel free to use it. I also would add to that list, because I wrote that a while ago, I would add to that list that you should be asking franchisees and even former franchisees, what are their revenues? What's the bottom line look like? Because this is an investment and you want to make sure you get return on that investment. And don't get emotionally involved. This is not an emotional decision. This is a business decision. The second thing is what we just covered. Read those 23 items of disclosure, really the first 20. They contain important information. I promised you I would tell you why you didn't have to read 21, 22, and 23. And I forgot. 21 simply says financial statements, and it is the financial statements of the franchisor. They're never in item 21. They're always in the exhibits. And we're going to talk about that as the third point here. So don't have to read 21 because there's nothing there. 22 is the disclosure of the contracts that are in the exhibits. So again, you don't have to read that. It's just a list of the contracts that are in the exhibit, which are also a list. And actually, the contracts are in that exhibit. So you don't have to read 22. And 23 is just a receipt that you will have to sign when you get that DocuSign document from a franchisor, because almost always they send it by DocuSign these days. And they're going to ask you to sign that receipt. It's okay to sign as long as all you are signing is receipt. For a receipt for getting that FDD. They want it so that they can keep track of that 14 calendar days that I mentioned earlier and have a record that they gave it to you. The third thing to do, so definitely read through the first 20 of those 23 items, talk to franchisees. And the third is to have the franchisor's audited financials, and they must be audited financial statements of the franchisor if the franchisor has been selling franchises for more than a couple years, a year or two. In the first year, it only has to be an opening balance sheet, so it doesn't give you a lot of information. So I do recommend that if you don't have the background to look at them yourselves, that you have a good business accountant that you can utilize to evaluate those franchisors' financials. And the rationale behind that is you want them to be financially strong enough to meet their financial obligations to you if it's brick and mortar, and they have promised to help you find good locations and put you in touch with the broker, that they have the financial means to do that they have the financial means to do the training. But even more important than all of that is that they don't go into bankruptcy in a short period of time afterwards. My background is that I was in-house counsel to Nutrisystem, as I mentioned. They had 1,800 locations, 1,300 franchised, and 500 corporate. They were bigger than Jenny Craig, bigger than Weight Watchers, and they went into bankruptcy while I was there. And I can tell you, not a fun experience. I was busy writing severance packages to all my close friends, and they got these phenomenal deals, phenomenal payouts, and I worked till the last day the company existed. And the company existed in that format, I should say. And then I was laid off, and I didn't even get paid the last week I worked there. So they got these great severance packages. I was, unemployed. But nonetheless, anybody looking at their audited financials could have seen they were financially weak. They went into bankruptcy. Within 2 years of that bankruptcy, every one of those 1,800 locations were out of business. So the 1,300 franchise locations, all of the owners of those franchises lost their business through no fault of their own. So very important to look at the audited financials of the franchisor and make sure they are a healthy, financially healthy company. Okay. So if you keep those three things in mind, you at least will have started with a good, solid company to then bring to us to evaluate for you. So this is going to be real quick because I'm not here really. I mean, I know I've brought my services up a couple times. I really didn't mean to be doing too much in the way of trying to sell you on it. I just really want to inform you. We do everything on a flat fee basis. And our procedures are that we start by checking that the trademark is a registered trademark, because that's the cornerstone of what you're buying. You're buying a licensed right to use that trademark that belongs to the franchisor. That's actually what you're buying when you're buying a franchise within a certain territory. Hopefully that's a geographic area that's yours exclusively, but maybe not. I mean, some franchises aren't exclusive territories, but you're being given that right to operate under that trademark. So we always check that first, because obviously if there isn't a registered trademark, what are you actually buying a right to? And then we check the records of the state in which the territory is going to be located. So if the territory is going to be located in California, let's say, then we'll check California state records for that brand, that name. Why are we doing that? Here's the reason. Under trademark law in the United States, it's actually based on use as a first priority over registration. What that means is that if there's a local business in your proposed territory that is the similar name, and I'm going to use the example that I've had issues with in the past, which is Budget Blinds. Budget Blinds is a discounted window treatment company, right? We all know them. They're all over the place. They have 1,500 locations, 1,500 franchisees. So they're all over the country. So if you were looking at a Budget Blinds, it just so happens that's a very common name for a window treatment business. When they only had 500 franchisees, we represented a client who was looking at a Budget Blinds franchise. And lo and behold, we found in their proposed territory, there was a private independent company selling window treatments, calling itself Budget Blinds. And we went back to Budget Blinds because they do not provide for any trademark infringement, hold harmless, or indemnification, meaning they will not come in, and if you're sued by that other company, they will not defend it and they will not hold you harmless. So we went back to them and we tried to negotiate that they would come in and hold him harmless. In that situation, they actually did. They will not do that anymore. It's stated in their franchise agreement. And in their FDD. It's your duty to look into it. And if there is a local company to deal with it, it's your responsibility. It's not their problem anymore. So yeah. And they're not the only ones. There are other brands that are like that. For example, Martinizing is a type of dry cleaning processing, and that many dry cleaners from 30, 40, 50 years ago called and said, Joe's dry cleaning using Martinizing as a method. And a lot of them call themselves Martinizing Dry Cleaning because they use Martinizing processing. So now there's a franchise called Martinizing. And again, important to go out there and check. So we check state records. So in the case of my example, it was California. We would check to make sure that Budget Blinds, if that's what they're looking at, Martinizing, whatever it is, Hand and Stone for massage. Maybe there's another massage company out there calling itself Hand and Stone because Hand and Stone, right? So, so maybe there is one out there calling it that we don't even know about. We always check that. And we tell the client to do a local Google or yellowpages.com search and play around with the name in any way that makes sense. Because if there's a local business that actually has a name that predated the trademark registration by the franchisor, that local business could have priority rights and sue you for trademark infringement. And that could be tens of thousands of dollars out of your pocket. So that's why we check state records and we tell the client to check locally. We review items 1 through 4 of the FDD. We don't go through items 15 to 23. As I told you, 21, 22, and 23 don't really have much in them anyway. But we don't go through items 5 through 20 because everything in those, like the fees, the territory, the trademark that we would need to know, is going to be part of the franchise agreement itself. As I said, that's the contract you're going to sign with the franchisor. So we don't feel there's a need to actually go through that. But we do go through items 1 through 4. As I said earlier, 1 and 2 are background about the company and the people involved. And most important from our perspective, we want to make sure that items 3 and 4, litigation and bankruptcy disclosures, that there aren't any red flags there. We go through the summaries that are in the FDD itself. And then we thoroughly review the franchise agreement, which is the contract with the franchisor. And we go through that cover to cover. And we really view our role as educating the client. In many instances, like a budget blinds, which has 1,500, at the last I heard, franchises in this system, they're not going to negotiate a single letter of that agreement. They're just not. Uniformity of a franchise often starts with the franchise agreement. And that goes back to my first slide where I said why you need a franchise attorney and not a general business attorney, because a general business attorney is going to mark up this document and redline it like crazy and think that it's negotiable and run up the legal fees. And it's not, because they're not going to negotiate anything. And even if it's a brand new startup franchise, who will negotiate, they're not going to take a red line and look at it. They're literally not going to look at it. So very important to understand that franchise agreement review is to understand what you don't know. And you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, we all, in any area of any business, law, or anything else, we don't know what we don't know if it's not something that we're familiar with. This is a very unique area of law. And I've represented many attorneys over the years because, again, it's very important to understand what this contract says, and it's not a typical contract. We then have a 2 to 3 hour typically call with the client to go over what that franchise agreement says, to go over items 1 through 4, to discuss. In my initial conversation with them, actually asked them if they've done the 3 things that I went through on the prior slide with you, to make sure that they've done that. Because I think that's very important. So during that initial consultation, which is free, we go over those 3 things. I go over my services and our flat fees. After we've been retained, we go through the franchise agreement. If they've retained us for the development agreement, we will go through that as well. Development agreements tend to be a little bit more negotiable than the franchise agreement in an established system. As I said, typically the timeline for development, sometimes there's other clauses in there, something called a cross default provision that we don't like, that they will agree to eliminate. We charge a flat fees for these services, and those flat fees haven't really changed in years. We also can set up an entity for you, again, nationwide. All of this is nationwide. We'll do lease review, revision, and negotiation. And leases, by the way, especially retail leases, shopping center leases, which is very common in franchising, are extraordinarily negotiable documents, very different than the franchise agreement. That could be a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day about commercial leases. But they are extraordinarily negotiable, and we take a heavy hand in redlining pretty much every paragraph of a lease. And that's separate and apart from the business negotiations that might have already happened with the broker that found that location. Very important clauses, and I'm happy to talk about that if there's time and anybody wants to hear about it. We also handle acquisitions and sales of businesses, franchise businesses. All of that's nationwide, and I do want to mention there are certain states that have franchise laws. I mentioned at the beginning federal law, but there are about 13 states that also regulate that FDD and require that it be registered with that state before anyone could be offered a franchise that lives in that state or that the territory would be in that state. On the East Coast, that's New York, Rhode Island, Maryland, and Virginia. I have to look at my map on the Midwest, but on the West Coast, it's Washington State, California, and Hawaii. In the middle of the country, it's North Dakota. That's the one I always forget. Indiana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan. So There's about 13 states that require that FDD be registered before they can offer it to you. And they have very state specific franchise laws as well that are that impact the franchise. So we're here to help. As I said, we offer a free initial consultation. I'm senior partner. As I said, we're 6 attorneys. We're all female. That's my contact information, my phone number. I did say I was going to have the, there we go. There's all my contact information with the website. So I don't know if you can see the blue, but it's lanardandassociates.com is the website. And I have loads and loads and loads of blog posts on there. And also, if you go to Nancy in the Media, I have lots of podcasts, videos, articles that I've written, articles that I've been quoted in, and lots of other information available. So I open it up to any questions. And if you want me to talk about commercial leases, I'm happy to do that as well. Oh, I know I did talk to you, Rosalind, at the beginning about talking about Rob's plans for fun.
And that was a big question that a lot of people had in terms of financing. So, you found something you like, they understand they need to hire an attorney and review the documents, but now it's time to pay. What are some of those options for them?
Perfect. Thank you. So that's a great question. So a lot of franchise systems, once they're more established, have established relationships with the Small Business Administration, the SBA, and you can get SBA loans for most of those. Not every one of the franchises out there will qualify for an SBA loan. For example, any salon suite concept, whether it's My Salon Suite, Salons by JC, Sola, Phoenix, any of them out there that you know around the country, those are considered real estate deals and not really considered franchises by the SBA. And so they will not lend money to anyone who's investing in that type of franchise. But so there's SBA loans. Some people do home equity lines of credit. There's, other means of funding. However, one of the ways that's pretty unique anyway, to franchising is called a ROBS plan. That stands for Rollover of Business Startups. And what that is, and there are certain companies that handle that, and you need to work with one of those companies, and there are several major players that handle it. One of them is called Benetrends, Benetrends, Benetrends. Another is Fran Fund, and another is Guidant. Those are the 3 major players. There's smaller players like Pango Financial and some others out there, but the 3 biggies are Fran Fund, Guidant, and Benetrends. And what they do, and Benetrends is the founder of the concept, and they're the ones that I know the best. What they do is they take your 401k or your IRA, and you should really only use a portion of that, not the full amount, because you're risking it in the business. If the business were to fail, you're going to lose this money. So you have to be careful. It's great for working capital, though. And that's what Rosalind and I discussed at the beginning of the call, before the call started. And they take those funds and they roll them over into a C Corp, a corporation that has not taken an S election, meaning the small business election. Even though it may be a small business, you're going to be double taxed. So that's a negative. The positive part of it is you're going to use funds that were sitting around, probably doing very little for you, and now use them for funding this business that you're interested in growing and investing in. And so they roll it over. It becomes the majority shareholder of that corporation and the profit sharing plan of that corporation. So that's how it works. Now, if you are investing in a franchise and you have a business partner that's investing in it too, it becomes a little complicated when you do a ROBS plan, because now the majority shareholder is this profit sharing plan. So what does that mean and it's one person's? Does the other person contribute as well? How does that work? What happens between the 2 people? I always have an issue, like it's not really a shareholder agreement between the 2 of them to define their relationship, because they may not even be shareholders. Maybe only the profit sharing plan is the shareholder. So it's a little complicated, but when it's spouses or just an individual doing it, it's often used, very, very, very commonly used as a funding mechanism for a franchise. It can be used for other types of businesses too, but it's very common in franchising.
I think that's a really great idea, because people are saying, and definitely, and you've seen more of these than I have. What are the typical startup costs for some franchises? So Are we talking 5,000, 10,000, 100,000? What are some of those costs or thoughts in terms of the initial, especially franchise fee?
So that's item 7 of those 23 items of disclosure. It's a chart that will tell you exactly that. And the answer to your question really varies depending on if it's brick and mortar or if it's home based. So a home based business, like a Budget Blinds, can be home based, or Outdoor Lighting Perspectives, or there's home based Pro Lift, which is a garage door opening franchise. There's so many home based businesses and franchises out there. They have a startup cost substantially less than a brick and mortar because they're not building out a business location, right? So that's very different than a home based. In a home based, I would say the initial franchise fee for any franchise is usually between 40 and 60,000. That's a typical franchise fee, whether it's home based or it's brick and mortar. You can find some that are a little less than that. I've seen initial franchise fees as low as 30, and I've seen them as high as 70 or 80,000. I've seen them as high as 90,000. So they vary across the board. The initial investment, however, is way beyond the franchise fee. So if it's brick and mortar, you're usually talking $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. It could be even $1 million. It depends on what it is and what's involved. I mean, a high-end massage franchise could be very costly. I mean, if you've ever been into a high-end massage, business, the build out alone is, they have beautiful things. They may have a waterfall on, or they may have, whatever, make it a Zen type of experience for you.
All those things.
Yeah. So then the cost is obviously a lot higher. If you're looking at a home-based business, you're not setting up an office even, you're just running it from your home, the costs are going to be substantially less than they typically are 100,000 or, somewhere in that ballpark. Now, there are businesses that sell for less. A Chick-fil-A sells for $10,000, but you don't own anything at the end of the day. It's not a true franchise in that you have any equity in that business at the end of the day. You make a lot of money while you own it. That I will tell you. I mean, anybody who's seen Chick-fil-A's, they have lines, right? Any hour of the day, practically, there's a line to get the food. And so the owners do well while they own it. But when your term is up, if it's a 10-year contract and you're not renewed for some reason, that's it, you're done. So you don't own any equity, you can't sell it. So what's nice about a regular franchise, a normal franchise that has a little bit higher fee, is that at the end of the day, you can sell it. I've seen franchises, these lawn sign. Have you seen those lawn signs where like, congratulations graduate, or, new baby, or whatever. You've seen them on people's lawns, right? There is a franchise out there like that. That's very inexpensive, but I don't know how much money they can make on it either, So you have to really weigh both sides. That, if the opportunity is very reasonable, there's usually a reason for that.
And someone asks in the chat, she says, how do you feel about vending machine type franchises?
It's so weird that you asked me that, because just today I spoke to someone who was looking at a vending machine business. It was not a franchise. It was a business opportunity. And that is a good segue for me to tell you the federal definition of what a franchise is, because I don't think I mentioned that. So what a franchise is 3 things. It consists of 3 criteria. Number 1, that there is a trademark being licensed. We did talk about that briefly, that there is a trademark being licensed to a third party. So the owner of a trademark is licensing someone else to use their mark in a business setting. That's number 1 criteria. It doesn't have to even be federally registered yet, but it is a trademark. Should be federally registered though, because again, it's a risk if you don't. The second criteria is that there is a fee involved. And the last time I checked, it was $600 or greater in the first 6 months of that relationship for anything, product, service, training, anything. You charge more than $600. Again, that was the last I checked. It might be a little bit higher threshold now, but you can see that threshold's pretty low. And the third is, what level of control does that franchisor exercise over your business? And in a franchise situation, the control is that you have to operate under their brand. that you must have, if it's brick and mortar, that you must have it look like all the others. There must be a trade dress, they call it, so that everybody looks the same. Think about McDonald's. They all have a golden arches. They all have this color scheme that all the uniforms are the same colors. As you go from one McDonald's in DC to a McDonald's in California, they're going to be fairly similar. The menu is going to be fairly similar, right? So that's part of being in a franchise. With the vending machines, they are business opportunities, because although they are operating maybe under a trademark, that exercise of control, and certainly taking a fee, the exercise of control over how that business is operated is kind of lessened to a huge degree, so that the franchisor, or in this case, the owner of the mark that's being licensed, is stepping away. The fine line is that under trademark law, which is governed by something called the Lanham Act, they must exercise, a owner of a trademark must exercise control over how that mark is used, or they lose it. So the fine line is, or tightrope, if you want to call it, is how do you exercise control over how the mark is used, but not exercise control over the business so that you're under a franchise. But that's for another day and another conversation. But nonetheless, what you're talking about is almost always a business opportunity and not truly a franchise. So you're not going to get the full FDD. You're going to get, in some states that have regulations over business opportunities, and federal law, which has some regulations over business opportunities, you will get basically a very, very, very simplistic disclosure. It's like a page or two, as opposed to an FDD, which could be 200 or 300 pages, because it's going to have all the contracts and everything in it. That just 23 items of disclosure typically are 50, 60 pages. So you're going to get a page or two disclosure as opposed to 60 pages of disclosure. So it's much less information. You're not going to get that list of franchisees. You're not going to get the franchisors, or in this case, the licensors, financials. You're not going to get all of the information that you're going to get in a franchise.
Now, one other question in terms of the commitment. So how long are you typically committing? So they may say, goodness, I only want to do this for 4 or 5 years. Is that typical? Is it 30 years? What's the typical kind of time commitment?
So today, typically I see 10 years. There are some franchises that are 5 years with 5-year renewals, maybe 1 or 2 5-year renewals. But the majority are 10 years. And there are occasionally ones that I see that are still 25 and 30 years. That was the norm 25 years ago. It is certainly not the norm anymore. But, I think Minuteman Press, for example, I think Sinorama, some of the franchises that have been around for a very, very long time, I think they still have 25 years in their contracts. I'm not 100% sure on that. But there are some out there that still have very, very long contracts. Majority are 10 years with maybe one renewal of another 10-year period.
Now, we had a number of ladies that said they wanted to start this franchise opportunity because they didn't necessarily have something that they weren't the best in terms of fixing cars or the most artistic or what have you. Do you need to know a lot about your business in order to go into that franchise?
And that's a great question. I mean, that kind of is why a franchise is out there and so popular. You could take someone who's a school teacher who knows nothing about fitness and the fitness business, or let's say you did even know. Let's say you're a school teacher and you wanted to do an early childhood, franchise. Doesn't mean you know how to run a business. It means you know how to teach. So what a franchise gives is a good franchise gives you the information that you need in order to be successful as a business owner. Doesn't mean you will be successful, because you also need to learn how to market that business, and that's very important. But a good franchise actually gives you the tools that you need in order to know how to run that business successfully. And they give you support people that are going to help with that as well.
I think that's a really important point, because I know a lot of people are like, I want to buy this as an investment. And so I know someone asked, do you have to work in your franchise?
That's an excellent question. So I often get people who come to me that want to be absentee owners. That's what they're called. They want to just invest in the opportunity and let a manager or somebody else run it. And a lot of franchise systems are sold as absentee ownership opportunities. most of them don't succeed that way. I can't tell you how many people come back to me 6 months or a year later and say, they sold it to me as absentee ownership. I talked to somebody the other day, and they were, I think, in Kansas, and they bought a territory in like Alabama or something, nowhere near where they are. And they were sold it as an absentee ownership business. And of course, it failed because they aren't there to watch over it. Their manager, you have all kinds of issues, as an absentee owner. The one type of business I will tell you that can probably succeed as an absentee owner are the salon suite concepts. Because really, once you set them up and you have tenants in them, so what they are, if you're not familiar, is that they are, you basically get a amount of square footage in a space, usually in a shopping center, and then you subdivide it into smaller spaces, and you lease those smaller spaces out to nail technicians, hair technicians, estheticians, and so on, who will run their own business in these smaller suites that you've set up. So the cost is high. You asked me earlier about the cost of a franchise. Any of those salon suites, because you have to put in sinks and chairs and divide it and whatever, the cost is high, and they're huge spaces. They're not 1,500 square foot or 2,000 square foot spaces. They can be 10,000 square feet spaces. They're big. So you're renting the 10,000 and you're dividing it into little spaces. So they tend to be very costly. They can be well over $1 million. But all in by the time you do the build out and everything else. But they're very lucrative because you're renting out these, and it's just you're bringing it. Once you've done that build out, most of these salon suite concepts are electronic entry. You don't need a concierge or any employees there, and you just need to have people renting those spaces. And as long as you're in an area where it's a need, you rent out those different salon suites, and it's just money coming in every month. So it's a great concept, but it's very expensive to start.
I didn't even know those were franchises. I've definitely been to a couple. You see somebody online and you say, "Oh, yes, want to do my hair," or whatever that might be. And
they are almost all of them. Sola, Phoenix, Salons by JC, my salon suite, they're all franchised. There are some that are independently owned, but a lot of them are franchised.
Oh, wow. And that's one of the things too, is we're kind of evaluating what franchise. So if someone is saying, I just want a franchise, and they haven't decided kind of what area, if it's food, if it's daycare, how do they start to narrow something down?
You're asking the best questions. It's so great, because I was thinking I never talked about how you even find a good franchise. So how do you find a good franchise? There are actual brokers out there. They call themselves consultants, but they're brokers. And they're paid just like a real estate broker. They're paid if you actually sign on the dotted line. They get a percentage of the initial franchise fee from the franchisor. So they don't cost you anything. I have resources that I'm happy to introduce people to. But there's loads and loads and loads of franchise brokers out there. On top of that, the International Franchise Association, which I'm a member of, has a website. It's called franchise.org. And that website also has all of their member franchise companies that are listed in there by categories. So let's say you're looking for a childcare franchise. You can look at childcare franchises on their website. Let's say you're looking at a home-based. They have a whole category of home-based, and you can go and look at those. So that's another resource. The nice thing about dealing with one of the brokers is that they'll help you even know. Let's say your school. Oh, I'm getting feedback. They'll help you with evaluating. They'll introduce you to a pool. They have a pool of franchises, several hundred usually in their system, and they'll kind of do a matchmaking. So it's kind of nice because it might give you an opportunity to think outside the box a little bit, because, you may come into this saying, well, gee, I was a school teacher, I'm retired, and now I want to do something with my life different. Maybe I want to invest in something that would be related to school, to teaching. Maybe I want to do a tutoring business, or I want to do an early learning. And they may kind of, because of their matchmaking, come up with some other things that may be good fits as well. So that's the nice part. And again, there's no fee that the brokers charge directly. They're paid by the franchise that you sign up with.
Oh, that's a good one. We might have to have them come out of matchmaking for a business, almost, trying to figure out what do you love or What
Yeah.
could you love enough to not be absentee so you can actually make it work?
Yeah.
This is a good question. Somebody said they were thinking of a car wash. Are there car wash franchises
I've
out?
never heard of one. That's a great question. I've never heard of a car wash. Look, there's franchises for almost everything. Almost everything out there. There's accounting firm franchises. I mean, look, H&R Block is a franchise. You know, Jackson Hewitt is a franchise. So there's accounting franchise. There's every kind of franchise out there. But with that said, I've never heard of a car wash one, but there may be one. I don't know. I know car washes tend to be very lucrative businesses, but also, just like I was talking about the salon suite, they're incredibly costly to set up. Really, really expensive setup. Once you've set it up, though, I know that they're very lucrative.
Because everybody's going to get their car wash, and then it rains, and then you got to go back.
Always, always inevitable, right?
Now, one of the things somebody talked about that personal guarantee, and so I know I can't remember, it was further up. She talked about that could potentially be a deal breaker, especially if her spouse was required. Are there ways to get around or protect your assets in this whole process?
So, well, there's two things. Yes, they require a personal guarantee, but the reality is that most franchise systems, the franchisor doesn't want to go after them, because why would they want to do that? What are they going to do with your, stocks and bonds, or your, I mean, they just want to get paid. So it's there kind of in the background to be the sort of hammer that's threatened if you aren't paying what you're supposed to be paying. They often don't exercise that. In a real estate setting, they're not as usually, it's more likely to be enforced, and that they will go after, but they're not going to ask for spousal consent. Landlords rarely have asked for that, but franchisors often do. What are some other options? Well, maybe get a line of credit, or that you offer instead, or get, some other means to secure that the franchisor has of some sort of security that they can go after, and not have it. I mean, I've had that situation where I had a franchise broker who had a deal that was all the way to the finish line. And she called me and said, I have this situation. The spouse inherited a great deal of money, and she doesn't want to, sign any personal guarantees. And so another option is to just have a personal guarantee on joint assets. And that way, if she has her own assets, she's not personally throwing them into the pot. It's just the joint assets that are on the hook. So there are some ways.
Protect your money. That's what makes it important.
Absolutely. You worked hard for it. Protect that money. No question.
Now, I did have someone ask, she mentioned like Subway in particular, she knew was oversaturated. Is there a place or a short list of places to say, wait, not that one? There's one of those everywhere. Is there a way to kind of find some of those?
That would be me. I know not all, of course. I don't know every bad franchise out there, but look, Subway just had a whole big expose on John Oliver, that really threw them for a loop. And Subway had some major issues, and they are trying to fix it. There are franchises that are more appealing. That's what brokers are for. That's why I'm suggesting that would be a good avenue to work with, because they know more about what's good and what's bad. But again, they have a financial stake in what you choose as well. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind, that, they're paid based on, the franchise fee. So not that fee varies that much. And hopefully, I mean, anybody I'd introduce you to is certainly going to have integrity and hopefully not be pushing you in a direction that's bad. But they don't always know either what's good or bad. That's why you have to do your own validation. That's why talking to franchisees is critical. That's why that was number one on my validation list. Call franchisees. Ask them lots of questions. One of my favorites is, would you do this all over again if you had that option? Because if they say yes, okay, that's a great thing. They may not be making as much money as they wanted to make, but they love it and they're happy, and okay. Or they may be making a fortune and hate it. And there is a brand out there, and I'm not going to mention their name because it's going to be a negative comment, but the brand, they're all over the country. And this is not a food business. And this brand is everywhere. And everyone on this call has heard of them, knows of them, and probably has used them. And they make a lot of money, and they sell for a lot of money. And almost without fail, no matter where I am in the country, if I ask the owner, would you do this all over again? Do you enjoy it? And every single one of them will tell you no.
Okay.
And the reason is, and they make a lot of money. The reason is because their franchisor is not treating them well. And they've had massive lawsuits against the franchisor. And again, that's why it's important to talk to franchisees. And one of my questions is, what's your relationship with the franchisor like? That's very important to ask.
That makes a big difference.
It does.
And now I'm like, I want to know who that is. You have to tell me that.
I can't tell you, I'm not on a public setting.
One person asks, can you pull out? I guess it's more so at what point can you leave without penalty? And then, one of those owners that if they could do it all over again, they wouldn't. Can they leave at that point in time? Like,
I always hate to hear a client of mine come back to me a year or two later and say, this was a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. And it does happen from time to time. No matter what kind of validation you do, sometimes they didn't talk to enough franchisees, or who knows, but they made a mistake. So what do you do now? Well, I had somebody buy, again, I'm not going to mention the brand, they had a business, an existing location from the franchisor, had been previously owned by a franchisee. It was a losing business. It was in the tutoring world, and they bought it for $1. And
wow.
You'd think for $1, you can make money on it, right? A year later, the guy was telling me he was throwing thousands of dollars every month into the business to just keep it alive. What can he do? The answer to that question is, the best answer, if it's brick and mortar in particular, is to sell it. Because not only do you have a franchise to worry about, but you have a lease that you've already signed, that if they're both 10 years, you've probably got a 10-year lease as well, as I said, and you've signed personal guarantees on both. So how do you get out from under that? It isn't just the franchise. The franchise, you may be able to get out. You may be able to go to them and say, look, I can't make a go of this. Please try to resell the territory or whatever. But when you've got the landlord there breathing down your neck as well, that poses a serious problem. And that landlord may have, if you're in year 2 of a 10-year personal guarantee, 8 years of rent. If you didn't use us to negotiate that lease, you might have 8 years of rent that you're personally liable for. That could be millions. So your best bet is to sell it. Again, if you can sell it for even fire sale, like $1, like that guy bought for $1, you could sell for $1. And it would be nice to be able to sell it for whatever, you put into it, but you can't always do that. So you have to be realistic and cut your losses at some point. But hopefully if you do it early enough in the process, you can get money out and hopefully recoup enough of the money.
Because in that sale scenario, you would be selling the lease and all the obligations that you have as well.
You're selling the assets, and the assets include the territory, the franchise territory, the lease rights for that location, and whatever other assets there are. So any computers, point of sale systems, desks, chairs, refrigerators, ovens, whatever it is that are the assets of that business, you would be selling, along with inventory typically, and client lists if there are ongoing clients. If you're in a franchise that has memberships, like a massage franchise, a fitness franchise, you're selling those memberships as well.
So yeah, so you can get out depending on what time. If it's during the disclosure point, you can get out without that cooling off period.
If you haven't signed the franchise agreement, walk away. At that point, you haven't. If you've just got that FDD and you haven't signed a franchise, you haven't committed to anything. So, yeah, that's the time to really do all of the investigation.
And I think it's good just to know when to cut your losses too.
Yep.
That might just be a thing to say. All right, I'll take $1 and at least not have this lease or whatever over my head too, which could be a big enough obligation that you're willing to. I won't get all that money that I put in there, but it's an investment. So, like Nancy said before, you could lose money and you could make money. So there are some people that are successful and some people that decide this isn't for them.
And that's what you need to really uncover when you're making those phone calls to franchisees. Really, how many of them, and former franchisees, how many of them have failed? really what is the failure rate of this particular brand? And to the extent you can find that out, I think that's really valuable information. There is nothing out there, and Rosalind, I'm sure you know this as well, that is going to ever guarantee your success. That's up to you. Even in a franchise which has a proven model that is successful, that most of the franchisees do very, very well, if you don't know how to market that business, you don't know how to get out there and bring business in and really know what you're doing with running that business, even with all of the help from a really good franchise system, you can fail. The failure rate on franchising is less than it is on a regular independent business ownership, to my knowledge, the last statistics that I saw. But nonetheless, you can fail.
And I think that's a really good point. But like you said, and I'll say this is the best thing, there aren't many attorneys that are flat fee. Most of them are charging you by the minute. Once you say good morning and how was your weekend, they are like, invoice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We do everything on a flat fee basis except resales. Resales of franchises, we do it, we handle hourly. But we give a pretty good ballpark at the beginning of the representation, so they have a good idea what to expect. With everything else, it's flat fee.
So I think that's perfect. Definitely, I've seen a few different people have said anything in the beauty side. There's food, there's the vending machines, there's all these other things, and we've talked about how to finance them, and you have so many different options. But there's always the best option is to talk to a specialist along the way. And so that's who Nancy is. And she's here to answer questions. She does a free consultation. So get your free consult. So if you're like, somebody said something, I don't think that makes sense. Or it's a great deal and you're like, is this too good to be true? Definitely get a partner along the way. And I think that's imperative. Speak to an attorney, iron out the details, and figure out if it's right for you. And then if you all get that franchise, let us know so we can come support.
Absolutely. I would love the opportunity to meet some of the people that have listened in and help you any way that I can. And you have my contact information. I'm extension 101 at that phone number. And my email is my first initial last name at Lanard and Associates, and it's all A in my name, lanardandassociates.com. So it's nlanard at Lanard and Associates. So email me, and if you think of questions after we get off, email me the questions or set up a call. I'm happy to help.
Perfect. And I just put Nancy's number in the chat and her website. So call her, email her, reach out, and let us know how it goes. Thank you so much, Nancy, for being with us today.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
What franchises you all are going to open. So let us know. We want to support you. And then until next Monday, have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. It's great.